The topic is roots of nutritional support. I have typed down almost everything so you can go through them as notes. Okay, why is nutritional support important for surgical patients? Surgical patients include post surgery patients and patients with burns, trauma. So, for all these patients, they have increased requirement of nutrients, and suboptimal nutritional support have impaired wound healing, altered immune responses, accelerated catabolism, increased organ dysfunction, delayed recovery, and increased mortality and morbidity. So, following surgery, the patients who are inadequately fed becomes undernourished within 10 days and display a marked increase in mortality. Feeding should therefore be initiated as early as possible to address the elevated nutritional demands and offset any pre-existing nutritional impairment. That is, if the patient was previously malnourished, then we have to address that as well. So the criteria to look into for perioperative nutritional support is the past medical history. As we mentioned, if there is malnourishment previously or chronic disease, if there is perioperative loss of body weight, if there is blood loss of more than 500 ml during surgery, and if the patient is malnourished, that is BMI less than 18.5 kilogram per meter square. And in children, if there is failure to thrive, if there is serum albumin less than 3 or transferrin less than 200 milligrams per deciliter, which are all pointing towards malnourishment. If you anticipate that the patient will be unable to meet the caloric requirements within 7 to 10 days perioperatively, and if there is catabolism, that is severe burns, trauma, sepsis, and pancreatitis, they are examples of catabolic diseases. So, these are the criteria to initiate nutritional support. Now, the things that you need to know about initiating nutritional support for surgical patients is that the oral route, oral feeds, if they can be given post operatively or in surgical patients, that is the best nutritional support or the best route to be given. If oral support cannot be given, then you should think about enteral feeding. Enteral feeding includes Ryle's tube insertion, that is nasogastric, nasojejunal, nasoduodenal feeds, or if it is percutaneous feeds such as gastrostomy, those are gastrostomy or jejunostomy, those are enteral feeding. And even if enteral feeding is also not possible, that is if there is something wrong with the GI system, as in ELS or any other issues with the GI system, then you can think about parenteral feeding, that is through IV or central routes. So the best feeding is oral. If oral is not possible, then enteral, and if enteral is not possible, then it is the parenteral nutrition. Okay, so initiating nutritional support, they should be considered for all patients according to the clinical assessment and guidelines over the perioperative period. And if a surgical intervention can be delayed, uh, if the patient is malnourished and if the surgical intervention is elective and not an emergency, then they have to be delayed, and you should prepare the patient nutritionally and then do the surgery. Okay, this is what we mentioned. You can either post operatively, you can give the patient orally. If that's not possible, through enteral feeding. Enteral feeding can be through a nasogastric or nasojejunal or nasoduodenal tube, or percutaneous tube such as endoscopically gastrostomy, or through a small surgery, a gastrostomy tube or jejunostomy tube. These are the enteral feedings. Otherwise, parenteral feed. Those are either through a peripheral line or through a central line. These are parenteral feeding. Now, the principles are, if you can use the oral route, that is the best feeding that is available because that is physiological. So use the oral route if the GI tract is fully functional and there are no other contraindications to oral feeding. If that is not possible, should initiate nutrition via the enteral route if the patient is not expected to be on full oral diet within 7 days post surgery and there are no other GI contraindications. So if oral feeding, if the patient is not taking orally, you can start enteral route if there are no GI tract contraindications. And if the enteral route is contraindicated or not tolerated, then you use the parenteral route within 24 to 48 hours in patients who are not expected to be able to tolerate full enteral nutrition within 7 days. So you have to maintain, if you're starting on parenteral nutrition, you have to maintain the parenteral nutrition until the patient is able to tolerate 75% of the calories through the enteral route and enteral nutrition until the patient is able to tolerate 75% of the calories via oral route. So this is what we have mentioned earlier. This is a flow chart of what we have mentioned earlier. So if you are not able, if there is a dysfunctional GI tract, then parenteral nutrition. If GI tract is okay, then think about oral nutrition. And if that is not oral nutrition, and if that is not possible, then enteral nutrition. And if the expected use is less than 4 weeks, then you can put a Ryle's tube, and you can give nasogastric or nasovaginal feeds. And if the expected use is more than 4 weeks, then a gastrostomy or jejunostomy feed. We'll talk more about the gastrostomy and jejunostomy feeds now. Okay, so this is the flow chart. Just few words. There is something called SIP feeds. So they are commercially available and you can give, if patients who can take appetite in small feeds, you can give them SIP feedings. Coming to enteral nutrition. Early institution of enteral nutrition following major surgery minimizes the risk of undernutrition and can abate the hypermetabolic response seen after surgery. And as mentioned earlier, administration of enteral nutrition can be accomplished via various routes, including nasogastric, nasoduodenal, and nasojejunal tubes, which are preferentially used in patients who are expected to require short periods of use, that is less than 4 weeks. And otherwise, if it is more than 4 weeks, you can either use open methods or percutaneous gastrostomy or jejunostomy. And how is enteral feeding beneficial over the parenteral nutrition? Because they maintain the structural GI tract and they provide functional support of the intestinal mucosa by providing nutrients such as glutamine and preserving the blood supply and promoting peristalsis. And also they help to reduce the risk of sepsis caused by bacterial translocation in enteral nutrition. Okay, this is over the parenteral nutrition that we're talking about. In critically ill patients, enteral nutrition should be initiated within 48 hours of injury or admission or post surgery. Feeding through nasogastric tube is the most cost-effective method of enteral nutrition support and perhaps the most helpful in preventing post-operative complications such as gastroparesis. And feeding through nasogastric tube, that is, you put a trials tube through the nasal or the oral route, usually the nasal route, up to the stomach. So that is the most simpler route as well for enteral feeding. Now, what happens in a normal person is that there is the lower esophageal sphincter which prevents us from having a gastric reflux. So what happens after we put a nasogastric tube, that is a Ryle's tube, is that the lower esophageal sphincter is already open. So there is more chance of reflux in such patients. To decrease the reflux and the risk of aspiration, it is recommended that the head of the bed to be raised to 35 degrees and the volume of feeds should not exceed more than 50 ml per hour. And suppose you give feeds to the patient and if there is gastroparesis or an ileus post surgery, you just keep feeding the patient with enteral feeding. So what should we do to check for paresis or ileus is that each 1 hour you should aspirate the feeds. If there is more than 200 ml of aspirate, that means the patient might be going in for gastroparesis or ileus. This is what we just said, and that can suggest sepsis as well. Now, how do you check for positioning of the tubes? A nasogastric tube through the nose, you put a tube into the esophagus and that reaches the stomach. So, how do you know that it has gone into the esophagus instead of the vocal cords? You'll know that, but because the patient will cough and what are the other methods of checking the position of the tube? You can take an X-ray, or a simpler method is you can confirm the position of the tube by keeping a stethoscope over the stomach, that is in the epigastric region. You place a stethoscope and you deliver air quickly with a syringe. So you can hear the noise through the stethoscope by auscultation. And that way you can confirm that the tube is in the stomach. This method of confirmation will be difficult in nasojejunal or nasoduodenal tubes. Now, what is the contraindication for enteral feeding? The contraindications are prolonged ileus, gastroparesis, bowel obstruction, acute pseudo-obstruction, ischemic enterocolitis, and other methods of malabsorption. Now, these were about the nasogastric, nasojejunal, and nasoduodenal feeds. We said that enteral feeding also includes the percutaneous methods of feeding, such as, okay, so they should be considered when there is prolonged feeding for more than 4 weeks. Okay, generally, enteral feeding is the nasogastric tube. We can also advance the nasogastric tube further into the nasojejunal or the nasoduodenal tube as we mentioned earlier. And in nasojejunal and duodenal feeds, they are continuous feeding rather than hourly feeding in nasogastric tubes. This is a table regarding the enteral route. So there is the nasogastric, the disadvantages, the nasoduodenal, nasojejunal feeds, again the disadvantages of them. And there is the gastrostomy. We'll come more into that. Okay, the gastrostomy, jejunostomy. So the gastrostomy and jejunostomy, they can either be placed. How do you place the gastrostomy tube? Okay, so it can either be placed endoscopically or through small surgery in the abdomen. Endoscopically, again, there are two methods. You can read about all that here. As I mentioned, everything is written down. So endoscopically, you can either place it through the oral route endoscopically or by making a small incision in the abdomen, a small stab incision in the abdomen. So there are two routes. Endoscopic itself, there are two routes to place a tube inside the stomach, and through the tube you feed the patient. Those are the endoscopic methods. Then there are open methods where you place a small incision, supraumbilical incision, midline incision, and you identify the stomach and directly you place a tube and then you close the stomach. That is the open method. So there are two methods. There are endoscopic methods, endoscopic itself two methods, and there is the open method for both gastrostomy as well as jejunostomy. And in both the method and for open method, endoscopically you can either give orally, or orally if it is placed orally, or in open method there is a tube that is placed outside. So inside the stomach it is closed and the tube is placed outside, so the food can be given through the tube that is placed outside. The complications include, since there is a tube, there will be infection around the tube. There could be procedure-specific complications such as necrotizing fasciitis and intra-abdominal wall abscess. Then persistently a tube is placed. So a persistent gastric fistula can occur on removal of the endoscopic gastrostomy tube. So these are the procedure-related complications of enteral nutrition. What are the contraindications for enteral nutrition? They are intractable vomiting, diarrhea refractory to medical management, paralytic ileus, distal high output intestinal fistulas, GI obstruction, diffuse peritonitis, severe shock or hemodynamic instability, severe GI hemorrhage, severe short bowel syndrome, severe GI malabsorption, and inability to gain access to the GI tract. Yeah, if those endoscopic and abdominal methods are not possible. Those are the contraindication. Complications we mentioned. There could be tube related complications such as malposition, displacement, blockage, breakage, or leakage for all the enteral nutrition methods that we spoke about. Local complications around the tube site, such as erosion of the skin or mucosa, especially if it is a gastrostomy or a jejunostomy and there's a tube outside through your abdomen. So it can cause erosion of the skin and mucosa. Then other GI problems such as diarrhea, bloating, nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramps, aspiration, constipation. Metabolic imbalances, electrolyte imbalances, vitamin deficiencies, drug interactions, and infective. Now, different formulations are available for different feeds. So for enteral feeding, the formulations are different, and for parenteral feeds, the formulation are different. Similarly, depending upon the disease condition of the patient, the formulations are different. Most formulations are hypoosmolar at full strength. So you dilute by 25% to 50% to make it isotonic and hypertonic formulas, and those are initially preferred to minimize the possibility of diarrhea from excess osmotic load to facilitate absorption. Okay, there's a table suggesting the schedule for enteral feeding, just for you to know. Coming to the complications we mentioned, when you place a nasogastric tube, other complications such as nausea, vomiting, epistaxis, sinusitis, necrosis, aspiration leading to pneumonia. We did mention about the lower esophageal sphincter becoming lax, tube malposition, dislodgement, feeding associated diarrhea, blockage of the tube. So if you place a fine bore, a bigger tube, there will be less chances of blockage. Refeeding syndrome is when you suddenly the patient is malnourished for a few days and then you suddenly start feeding the patient. There will be a sudden shift in the electrolyte and vitamin imbalances. There will be sudden imbalance of electrolytes, so that causes refeeding syndrome. All these we mentioned about the electrolyte abnormalities. Okay, so that is about the enteral nutrition. You need to know the different methods of enteral nutrition, the contraindications of enteral nutrition, when to give the enteral nutrition, what all are the enteral nutritions before if the feeding is just for 4 weeks. If you're anticipating that the feeding is going to be for more than 4 weeks, what is the method used and what are the different methods and the complications of enteral feeding. Now there is parenteral nutrition that, as you mentioned, is either through the IV or the central route. When long-term delivery of hyperosmolar regimes is required, total parenteral nutrition is facilitated through a dedicated central line. And when it is for lower osmolar solution, a peripheral line can be used. Okay, so the best method is always the oral method. If oral method of feeding is not possible, then you attempt the enteral nutrition, and if there is something wrong with the GI tract, the GI contraindications, then you attempt for the parenteral nutrition. Thank you.